This conference will now be recorded.
Okay. So we'll start the session in few minutes. So in the meantime, I think one person will be just giving the introduction about this session. And also we'll wait for other people to join in.
This conference will now be recorded.
I think one of you is supposed to give the introduction about this session. You can start off with that. Once you are done, then I can start with the session.
Tanisha.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, please go ahead.
A very warm welcome to all. We are here for a webinar entitled VLSI Design Flow and Industrial Trends, being conducted by IEEE YMCA Student Branch. In addition to this, we like to mention that our renowned speaker for today's session, Mr. Srinivas Reddy, Founder Director, VLSI Guru, a well-known institute for VLSI training. Proceeding further, I would like to request Srinivas sir to share his words of wisdom.
Sure. Thanks for the introduction. So we'll start with the session now. As mentioned in the introduction, the session will be on VLSI design flow and industry trends. So talking to Rohit, I came to know that the participants in this session are from different backgrounds. I mean to say, some of you are from first year, second year, and so I won't make any assumption about your prior knowledge about VLSI design flow. Okay. So this would be the agenda for today's session. We will understand the VLSI design flow. We'll understand the industry trends. Then I will take some time to address your questions. Just give me a minute. There's a background noise. Okay. So first of all, to understand VLSI design flow, we need to understand the end customer requirements. And the end customers are basically the people who use the electronics. Mostly our requirements are driven by performance, power, noise, reliability and testability, and the price and time to market, and price and portability basically. So we'll understand the VLSI design flow, then we'll see how do we achieve performance, how do we achieve power efficient designs and how do we achieve lower cost and how do we make sure that we are able to bring the product to the market in a lesser time. Okay. So first let us understand VLSI design flow. VLSI design flow can be majorly divided into two parts. One is the front end domain, what we call as pre-synthesis flow. One is VLSI backend flow, what we call as post-synthesis flow. So each of these domain have multiple aspects. And to understand this VLSI design example, we will take example of mobile SoC and a traffic light controller. Given that we have a 1 hour time, so within that time, how much we can do, we'll plan accordingly. As per that 1 hour limitation, I will see how do we focus on all these aspects. To understand this, right, the best way, just give a minute. I'll make notes as well. So to understand the VLSI design flow, right? We can take an example of a car manufacturing. Just an analogy, basically. Let's say car manufacturing, or I think easily we can correlate house construction. So I will just take a couple of minutes. We will go through various steps. Then we'll see how that correlates with VLSI design flow. So how does it start? We start with requirements. We list down requirements. What is that we specifically want in the house? How many rooms? Everything, right? In terms of how many floors, different requirements, we come up with that. Then from the requirements, we approach architect. Then we approach a Mestri, let's say. Then we start the construction. I mean, the whole construction is divided into multiple stages. So same way, the way we are looking at house construction in different stages, the VLSI design flow starts from requirements till the end product is manufactured. I mean, okay. So here in this slide, I'm listing down various steps that goes into VLSI design flow. So first it starts with the VLSI design flow starts with the requirements. Let's say if I take an example of a mobile phone SoC, what are the requirements of mobile phone SoC? It starts with what kind of performance do we need? So to meet that performance, what kind of processor to be used? And what kind of display we need? And to meet this performance, what kind of USB or PCI Express or MMC card or graphics GPU processor to be used? So all those things will be decided. So the architect will decide to meet this specific design requirement, what components to be used. Then let us say our SoC consists of, mobile SoC consists of 50 components or subsystems. For example, some processor subsystem, GPU subsystem, display subsystem, and PCI Express controller, USB controller, like that various components he will list down. And the architect, this work is done by the architect. The person who develops the design architecture is called as architect. He understands the design requirements. he lists down what all components are required and what are the specific components are required. Let's say if I'm going for process subsystem, he needs to decide what specific processor to use. I mean, what is the specific requirement? Is it performance? Is it the power consumption? Is it the cost wise? So there are few things he decides, and based on that, he figures out which processor is the right fit for that. So let me tell you in this perspective what is that we are talking about: performance, power, and cost. If I talk about processors, one of the most commonly used processor is ARM processor. ARM itself comes with multiple variants: A series processors, M series processors, R series processors. If it is mobile phones, for mobile phone which require high-end application, I mean, most of the applications you run in mobile phones are high-end applications which require higher data throughputs. So for this, they will choose A series processors. These are called as application series processors. One is embedded series. These are used for medium performance applications. I mean, it could be something like washing machines, basic consumer electronics. R series is real-time series, real series process. These are used in different applications. So based on the requirements that are coming to him, there is a marketing team who will see what kind of product will be required by the end user after 2 or 3 years. Let's say I start thinking about an idea that product will be targeting the market in 2022. So based on those requirements, the architect develops the architecture. So he comes up with some kind of architecture like this. So he has 50 components, for example, ARM subsystem, display subsystem, graphics GPU subsystem, multimedia subsystem. These 50 components need to be placed into one specific block, and they need to talk to each other. Let's say there is a DDR, there is a need for this component to talk to ARM processor need to send data to DDR, and ARM processor needs to read data from DDR. The same thing with the GPU also. Let us see what is an application where GPU needs to read data from DDR, so that you will understand why these components need to interface with each other. So what is that we have listed now? Initial processes. There's a marketing team who gathers information regarding the customer requirements. 2-3 years down the lane, when the product is supposed to be launched. These requirements are given to architecture team. Architect will be at least 20+ years experienced. I mean, they understand each and every minute aspect of the design. What they do is, based on the requirements, they come up with what subsystems or components are required, and what is the generation of those components required. For example, components required. Just for example, let's say DDR is there. DDR has multiple generations. DDR1 to DDR5. Even though currently mostly industry is currently using DDR4, but we have different generations like DDR1 to DDR5. Then we have LPDDR1 to LPDDR4. LPDDR5 is also there. So LP here stands for low power, which is mostly targeted for mobile SoC applications. I mean portable SoC applications, I would rather say. What is portable means? Which mostly work on the battery power, which are not directly connected to the main power supply. So I'm just giving an example of DDR to help you understand how does the architect makes a decision. Let's say if he goes for DDR5, DDR5 will give high performance. Let us say example, it gives 4 gigabytes per second speed. Let's say DDR4 gives lesser performance. Let's say it gives example of 2 gigabytes per second. It's just a hypothetical numbers, but let's say this costs some 100 rupees for megabyte storage. Just an example. Let's say this costs only 75 rupees for megabyte storage. Here they make a decision given my current requirement. So first he sees, I mean whatever product I want to use, would it be sufficient? Can I, if I use 2 gigabytes per second, would it still meet my performance requirements? So if DDR4 is able to meet my performance requirement, then his priority shifts to cost. So you see, by utilizing DDR4, I'm able to save the cost. So he will choose DDR4. Even though DDR5 is available, they will not go with DDR5 because the cost of manufacturing is higher, because it's the latest technology. So yield will be lesser. There are multiple things they will take into consideration. Based on that, they will decide that we'll go for DDR4. The same thing applies to various other components. Let's say multimedia subsystem, GPU. Let's say the main processors, display subsystems. Let's say camera subsystem. So each of these components will have different generations. Let's say even for that matter, PCI Express, USB. PCI Express also has generations like PCI Express Gen 1 to Gen 5 is there. USB also has USB 1.0, USB 2.0, USB 3.0 and 3.1. Different generations are there. So based on the few requirements, I mean, architect is majorly taking into consideration 3 factors: performance, the power consumption, and the price and the portability area. Price and area. Based on these 3 factors, he will choose what components are required, what generation of those components are required. So if he is able to meet the performance with a lower generation, let's say with USB 3.0, if he is able to meet the required performance, he will not go for 3.1. Let's say he is able to meet power behavior with, I mean, using, let's say DDR4 reduces the power consumption, so he will go for DDR4. So he makes such complex decisions. So finally what we have is various components, subsystems or components, and the generation of those components to be used. I mean, which specific IPs of those components, IP and their versions of those components to be used. Now comes developing the architecture. What is architecture? Is very simple: connecting all above components to each other based on how they interact with each other, interface with each other. That is what we call as design architecture. In this case, what architect would do is he will categorize the components into majorly 2 categories. The components will be categorized into two categories. One is high performance components blocks, high performance blocks. One is low performance blocks. High performance blocks means the components which working on higher clock frequency, components working on lower clock frequency. So basically we majorly divide all the components into different categories. Examples of these components will be ARM processor subsystem, ARM subsystem, GPU subsystem. You see why I would call why GPU, let's understand why GPU requires high performance, high frequency. See, GPU generally involves one of the example typical use case of GPU is playing high-end games, playing games involving lot of graphics, right? So that requires lot of data to be fetched from the memory. So the DDR will have the image, and that image need to be fetched very frequently, and lot of data need to be fetched. In those cases, GPU subsystem need to be working on high frequency. Whereas for low performance, example is keyboard is an example. Let's say I am typing keyboard. For 1 hour of my teaching, 1 hour of teaching, I may type only 10,000 characters, which is 10,000 bytes, 10,000 ASCII characters, which is nothing but 10,000 bytes. So I need to basically transfer 10,000 bytes. If you convert to kilobytes, 10 kilobytes roughly, 10 kilobytes per hour. Whereas GPU requires to transfer multiple gigabytes per minute. You please compare this. A GPU kind of applications require multiple gigabytes, or I will say n gigabytes, multiple gigabytes per minute. Whereas my keyboard, the one I'm typing here, will require probably 10 kilobytes per hour. So these kind of blocks which require higher data transfers are called as high performance blocks. For example, what are the other components which require high performance, which needs to be working on higher frequency? DDR, PCI Express, USB. See, even if you take USB, when you connect your pen drive, you need to transfer some gigabytes of data in a few minutes of time. We means the architect classifies the components into these categories: high performance, low performance blocks. So based on that, he comes up with the architecture. Now comes the next stage, that is architecture. Architecture is very simple concept. He draws 2 lines. This is called as high performance interconnect, low performance interconnect. So system will have 2 interconnects. SoC will have 2 categories of interconnects. Interconnect is what? Meaning is what? A component which connects multiple components to each other. Instead of doing dedicated one-to-one connection, it connects multiple components together. So the simple analogy of example of interconnect in real life is post office is an example of interconnect, where post office acts like a common interface through which we send all the post, money order, different things, and it reaches the end person. Same thing, when he gives the response back, we get the same response. Same thing interconnect does. Essentially, interconnect connects multiple components to each other. Having said that, in real life, we don't have a post office for each one of us, right? We don't. Let's say there are 1,000 people in a village. There are no 1,000 post offices. There's only one post office, and it caters to all 1,000 people. Same is the role of interconnect. So what interconnect does is it connects. I think let me draw a clear picture so that it will be easy for you to understand. One is high performance interconnect, one is a low performance interconnect. Then to the high performance interconnect, the architect will connect the high performance blocks. Let's say ARM processor subsystem will be connected here. GPU subsystem, display subsystem, camera subsystem, DDR, PCI Express, various components will be connected, and all of them will be finally connected to this interconnect. So assume that these connections are there. I don't, given that we have a short time, I don't want to get spend a lot of time drawing the things. All that I want to tell is, so here low performance components will be connected. So something like SPI, I2C, keyboard, different components. And to connect these two components, because these are high performance component, this will be based on protocols like AXI, AHB, OCP protocols. In a short time, I'll tell you what is AXI, what is AHB, what is OCP. These are the bus protocols through which these components transfer data to each other. Like say, I want to initiate a write to DDR, read from DDR. So how does it happen? There is a specific protocol called as AXI or AHB or OCP, through which this component will initiate a write to this, and this component will give a response to this. And to connect these two components, we'll use a bridge that will be called as, let's say this is working on a low frequency protocol called as APB. This will be called as AXI to AHB bridge. This will be called as, since it is converting from AXI format to APB format, it will be called as AXI to APB bridge. So this diagram is what is called as architecture. So the role of architect is to come up with this diagram. At first you may be thinking that this looks very simple, so why do we require a 20 years experienced person to do this? This is very important because the way you connect, the way you define the behavior of all these components is going to set the pace for complete VLSI design flow. Any mistake you do, let's say you miss one flop here, let's say one flip-flop is missed somewhere here, the whole behavior goes wrong. There are many times where a chip doesn't work because one flip-flop is not there. And the amount of investment that goes into complete VLSI design flow is multiple $1 million. So if the architecture is not done properly, for example, so what I mentioned is, if architect gives complete information about how the components are connected, the frequency, voltage, frequency, the division of the voltage domains, power domains, clock domains, that whole information he gives. So understand that it is not just this kind of diagram he gives us. He gives complete information about what voltage to be used, what frequency to be used, how the different domains are divided. Let's say this will be working on 1.5 volts. This will be working on 3 volts. This will be working on 3.2 volts. So to that extent, he gives the information. That is what we call as the architecture. So I hope you understood the basic idea about architecture. In summary, what is architecture? Based on the marketing requirements, you figure out what components are required. You categorize them into two categories: high performance components, low performance components. High performance components will be working on a high performance interconnect. So this will be working at, let's say, at 2 gigahertz. This will be working at probably 200 megahertz. So which is a difference of 1:10. This is working 10 times faster. This is working 10 times slower compared to this thing. Then this architecture, what is the final goal? Whatever architecture we have drawn, this need to be converted into a chip, and that should go into my mobile phone. Essentially, that's the whole idea, right? So this diagram need to be going into my mobile phone. And it doesn't go just like that, right? I mean, if I let's say you go to a house architect, he gives you a house architecture diagram. It is not exactly the house, right? You need to finally approach a Mestri, and then he has to construct, and you have to go through that complete flow. That is where the remaining complete flow comes into picture, where these requirements and specifications goes to a design team. What is the design team does is, they use a language called as Verilog or VHDL. So the design team, so this architecture and specification are input to RTL design team. They use a language called as Verilog or VHDL to implement the above architecture in Verilog coding format. To help you understand, I'll give you a very simple example. Because I can't code mobile SOC here, we'll take an example of a traffic light controller. Traffic light controller has some specifications. Very simple specification is, it should be green for 30 seconds, yellow for 20 seconds, red for 50 seconds, let's say. This is the requirement. And it can be in different modes. Let's say it can work in different modes. High traffic mode, low traffic mode. That is, over weekends it will be low traffic mode, over weekdays it will be high traffic mode. One is blinking mode. Let's say these are my requirements, and these are the some specific timing requirements. Probably, let's say during high traffic mode. This thing. These requirements need to be finally converted into a code, Verilog code. So how we do Verilog code? I will also write that. Module, traffic light controller, clock, reset of the inputs, state is the output. What does state indicate? Whether are you in whether the traffic light is in green state, yellow state, or red state. Then these would become input, clock, and reset. Output, state. Then we develop, output will be 2 bits. One is yellow state, green state, red state, blinking state. Different states are there, for example. We develop a Verilog code always at positive edge of clock, begin, end. If reset, don't mind if I'm coding it faster because we have a timing restriction. So I'm trying to help you understand this complete flow with a simple example of traffic light controller, so that you understand what is meant by RTL coding, what is meant by RTL integration, what is meant by functional verification. Then when we go to the other aspects, you will be able to correlate what we are talking about. If reset, begin, end, the state design will go to red state. Else, begin, end. We write a state machine. Case state, end case. If you are in red, what to do? If you are in yellow, what to do? If you are in green, what to do? So count will be increased, count plus 1. We should be in red state for, let's say, 50 seconds. Next state will be green, let's say. Similarly, count will be made 0. Y4. Let's say yellow state for 20 seconds. Next state is this is green, sorry. This is yellow. Next state is yellow. Here, next state is, let's say, yellow state for 30 seconds. Next state is red. So basically, what we do in initially happened is we got the requirements. Our requirements were, we want a traffic light controller which will be in green, yellow, red for 30 seconds, 20 seconds and 50 seconds, and it need to work in few modes: high traffic mode, low traffic mode and blinking mode. Right now I didn't take this into consideration. These requirements would go to an architect and he would come up with the architecture. But see, traffic light control is a very simple thing. It doesn't require any specific architecture. So these architecture and specifications become input to the RTL design team. So the design team will develop this kind of Verilog code. They would develop this kind of Verilog code. In this case, how many lines is it? We have coded around 36 lines of code. A mobile SoC RTL Verilog code can be lakhs of lines of code. It could be multiple lakhs of lines. So, and these components, whatever I have drawn, this is one Verilog code, this is one Verilog code, this is one Verilog code. All of them are different Verilog codes. What is that keeps Verilogs? I mean, you may question, why can't we use C program or C++ program or Java kind of programs, kind of languages for VLSI, I mean coding chip behavior. Basically they can't implement, these languages can't implement the concept of time, concept of structure, concept of state, concept of storage. There are concept of concurrent execution. Basically these languages C, C++, Java, they can't implement this concept of time, structure, state, storage and concurrent execution. Because of that, there was a need for new languages like Verilog and VHDL. So using this Verilog and VHDL, we implement the design behavior. Like the way I have coded this thing, the Verilog code will be developed for ARM processor subsystem, display subsystem, graphics processing unit, PCI Express, DDR, everything. And the person who connects all these things together is called as integration engineer. The person who connects everything is called as RTL integration engineer. Then once we have integrated all these things together, we need to verify check whether this code is working properly or not. Let us say I have done a mistake here. Instead of count equal to count plus 1, I made it count minus 1. What will happen? This is a functional bug. If not detected, it will go into final chip and chip will not function properly. So originally I was supposed to code count equal to count plus 1. What is that I'm doing is I'm counting the time. Whenever count reaches plus 50, I mean whenever count reaches 50, that is I have lapsed 50 units of time. I am moving to a next state called as green. Whenever I'm coming to green, I'm doing the same thing. Whenever count reaches count plus 1, whenever count reaches 20, where is the count happening? Count is happening at the positive edge of the clock. So whenever count reaches 20, I'm going to yellow state. Once I go to yellow state, again I keep counting. Count will start from 0 because of this. Whenever count reaches 30, I'm going to red state. So this keeps repeating. So 50, 20, 30 units. This keeps repeating. Let us say I have done a mistake here. Instead of plus, I have done minus. So who catches this? These kind of issues are caught by functional verification engineer. So there is a team called as functional verification team. So the role of functional verification team is to catch the issues in the Verilog code. For that, they develop test bench. They develop test bench for that. Along with that, we do something called as power aware verification. All these steps together is called as VLSI front-end domain, also called as pre-synthesis flow. So what is that? What is the final outcome of pre-synthesis flow? We have started with the requirements. We have a working Verilog code. But can I sell Verilog code? Can we sell Verilog code and you ask the customer to use it as a mobile phone? Can we give our Verilog code to be used as a mobile phone? Answer is no, right? You can't sell a Verilog code and ask someone to use it as a mobile phone. We need to convert this Verilog code, whatever Verilog code we have. This need to be finally used into converted to a chip. That whole process where we start from Verilog code till it becomes the chip is what we call as the VLSI backend flow. So in summary, VLSI has two domains. One is front-end domain, one is backend domain. Front-end domain is starting from specifications, Verilog coding, making sure that the code is working properly. Backend domain is what? Starting from this code, starting from above developed code, finally coming up with the chip is called as VLSI backend domain. So majorly we can divide the VLSI into two domains, front-end domain, backend domain. Front-end domain is more coding intensive job. Backend domain is more technology and tool oriented job. Backend domain is more technology and tool oriented job role. So what are all aspects involved in backend domain? Let us understand. Backend domain has various aspects like synthesis, gate level simulations. What is synthesis is? This Verilog code, you take this Verilog code, this Verilog code will be converted into gates format, AND gate, OR gate, some flip-flops. So when you give it this Verilog code as input to a synthesis tool, let's say this is synthesis tool, this Verilog code will be equivalently converted into gates format. AND gate, OR gate, flip-flop, different flip-flop. For the people who are from engineering first year and second year, probably you may be having little difficulty in understanding this, but there are tools available in VLSI industry, what we call as electronic design automation tools. What they do is they take this kind of English code, I mean what you have written in Verilog language, they finally give you the same behavior in terms of gates format. AND gate, OR gate, NAND gate, NOR gate, different gates. That step is a very important step, because what it is doing is, what synthesis does is it converts our Verilog code into gates format. That from there the whole backend flow starts. In the backend flow, what happens is we start with gate level simulations, formal verification. What is formal verification is, we have the Verilog code, we have the gates, checking whether both of them are same or not. Making sure that both Verilog code and gates are same, both of them are same is called as formal verification. Let us understand what is DFT means. The next step is what? DFT. DFT stands for design for testability. What is formal verification? Making sure that checking if Verilog code is matching the gates functionality. So what is formal verification? Checking if Verilog code is matching the gate level converted circuit behavior. Then comes a step called as DFT, which stands for design for testability. What is design for testability? I'll take 2 minutes. It's a very big subject. Whatever I'm talking about, gate level simulation, formal verification, DFT, physical design, these are very in-depth subject. If I try to talk about them in 1 or 2 minutes, you won't understand much, but due to time constraints, we have to quickly move about this. So what is DFT is, once chip is manufactured, we need to check if chip is working properly. Otherwise, it goes into phone. Let's say it goes into phone, and otherwise it goes into phone. The phone will not function properly. So before it goes into the final product, final phone, the chip need to be checked whether chip is working properly or not. For that, we run, there will be a person called as post silicon validation engineer who checks whether chip is manufactured properly. He is called as PSV engineer, post silicon validation engineer, runs some test patterns on the chip. So how does it look like? This is my chip. I am applying some patterns onto it, some inputs. Based on the output, I can check whether the chip is proper or chip is bad. If the chip is bad, it will not go into the product. If it is chip is good, it goes into my mobile phone. So the person who generates these inputs, is called as DFT engineer. The DFT engineer generates the test patterns which will be applied to the chip to check whether chip is manufactured properly or not. Once this is done, we have a next step called as physical design. It is one of the very important steps in the VLSI flow. Next step is physical design flow. Physical design. In that, we have millions of gates. What are gates here? AND gate, OR gate, NAND gate, different gates are there. They need to be accommodated into, all these need to be put into 10 square mm, let's say, or 50 square mm square. I am talking about this would be the area of chip that goes into your mobile phone, into which we have to put millions of gates. The person who does that work is called as physical design. Not only that, he has to do what? Place all the components in the chip, that is 50 square mm area, connect all of them, do the clock distribution, what we call as clock tree synthesis, then connect all components to each other, what is called as routing. Once it is done, we need to verify that there are no setup and hold time violations. Setup, I mean, some of you may not be familiar with setup time and hold time, but it's a setup and hold time are two very important keywords for every VLSI engineer. So this whole flow is called as physical design flow. So basically what is physical design? You have the RTL code. You had a RTL code, which was an English format kind of. You did synthesis. You got gates, AND gate, OR gate, NAND gate, different gates. The whole behavior came in different gates. All these things need to be placed into a small area. That work, who does that work is called as physical design. As part of that, he goes through various stages, what we call as floor planning, placement, power planning, clock tree synthesis, routing, STA, physical verification, IR drop analysis. They go through various stages, and finally you have a circuit. Our whatever design we had initially, Verilog code, it is represented in terms of gate level format, and it is connected at the gate level, and it is available in the silicon format. Finally, that product will be fabricated. Finally, that product will go to the fabrication. So fabrication happens in some kind of silicon plates, you can call it as silicon wafers, and in a one silicon wafer they will manufacture, let's say, 1000 chips. They cut it like this. Actually, in real life also they cut it like this. Each of these square is our chip. So I was talking about this, right? The gates are placed into one area, they are connected to each other. That is what I'm talking about here. We need to check whether this chip is working properly or not. That part is called as post silicon validation. What is post means? Silicon has come out. We need to check whether this chip is working properly or not. The person who does that work is called as post silicon validation. To do post silicon validation, we need to give some inputs to the chip, and we need to check the outputs of the chip. That inputs are generated by DFT engineer. The name of DFT stands for design for testability. What they do is they give some input patterns, and they expect some patterns to come out. If the same expected pattern comes out, the chip is working properly. So this is how the VLSI design flow works. So let us quickly revise where we started off with. We started with understanding the requirements. From the requirements, we come up with architecture. Architecture and specification becomes input to the design team. The design team uses a language called as Verilog, and they develop individual components. And these components are connected to each other. That process is called as integration. Integration is similar to assembling your your desktop. Let's say you purchase a CPU, you purchase CD-ROM, you purchase RAM, different things, and you assemble them, right? It is something similar to that. Once integration is done, we need to verify whether that RTL is working properly or not, that code is working or not. Here RTL stands for register transfer level. So that process is called as functional verification. Once you have done this functional verification, you are sure that code is working properly. Now this code need to be finally converted into a chip. Whatever coding you have done, you need to convert that code into a chip. That whole process is called as backend flow. based on the complexity of the chip involved, this whole process may take 2 years or 3 years. Sometimes it may take only 6 months. If it is mobile phone SoC, it takes 2 to 3 years. If it is a simple applications, it may take only 6 months time. And a mobile phone SoC may require overall 1 second. Okay, mobile phone SoC may require around overall in this whole process around 400 engineers working for different stages put together. You may be requiring 400 engineers working. Now, why is it important to you? It is important because this is where the jobs comes from. I mean, when we say I want to get into VLSI job, that VLSI job is nothing but one of those 400 jobs I'm talking. We will going forward, I will talk about how these things gets distributed across these domains. Okay, VLSI design flow very highly tool intensive job. What is tool intensive is we use many tools, what we call as EDA tools, which stands for electronic design automation tools. They automate. I think during your bachelor's, I mean, different years of BTech, you would have come across ARCAD, different CAD tools, computer aided design tools, right? So similar to, like, they are used by mechanical engineers. Similarly, in VLSI, in electronics, we use tools called as electronic design automation tools. They automate the way we do the things. Instead of user manually doing everything, these EDA tools automate the things. So let me give you one statement. If EDA tools were not there, we don't have any mobile phones at all. These companies like Synopsys, Mentor Graphics, Cadence, these are the companies which develop EDA tools. If these companies were not there, we wouldn't have any mobile phones, we wouldn't have any video games, we wouldn't have any remote control, nothing would be possible. So that is the importance of EDA tools in the complete flow. Okay. So we use almost 20 to 30 EDA tools. Let's say for functional verification, we use from Synopsys VCS and Verdi. From Mentor Graphics, we use QuestaSim. From Cadence, we use NCSim. So there are majorly 3 companies, EDA companies: Synopsys, Mentor Graphics, Cadence, ANSYS. There could be another few companies, but these are the companies which have major share. Let's say Synopsys could have 40 to 45% of the market share. Cadence can have around 30%. I mean, this could vary, and it's just based on my understanding. Okay. Like DFT, Synopsys has few tools. Mentor Graphics has a tool. Cadence has a tool. For different stages: physical design and STA, custom layout, RTL integration, physical verification, IR drop analysis. So at different stages, we use different tools. Now your next question will come. Let's say if I want to get into VLSI design flow, do I need to learn all these tools? You don't need to learn all these tools, because you will be working only into one specific domain. Let's say you get into VLSI design flow, you will be only either doing functional verification, you will be either doing only DFT, you will be either doing only PDA and STA. You will never be doing this complete flow. Because of that, you don't need to learn all these tools. In my case, I'll just give you an example of my case. I have close to 14 years of experience. Before I quit my job and I started training profession, I have never done anything beyond functional verification. This is the only domain in which I have worked in throughout my 14 years of experience. I never did RTL integration, I never did DFT, I never did any of these domains. So hence, you don't need to worry that I mean, you don't have to learn each and every tool I'm showing in this slide. I'm just showing you this slide to show you how important is EDA tools. Every part of the VLSI design flow is implemented using some tools what we call as electronic design automation tools. Instead of we doing the things manually, they automate the whole process for us. We just have to give major inputs to the tool. Tool does everything for us. Rohit, can I extend the session by another 10-15 minutes?
Yes, sir. No problem.
So, okay, now given this, we have majorly understood what is VLSI design flow. We have understood different EDA tools required in different stages. For the people who couldn't capture this information, I'll be sharing this presentation so that you don't need to make a note of all these things. Okay. Now let us understand, if you are planning to get into VLSI domain, VLSI job, what is the skill set you require to start with? And what is the skill set you require if you want to get into front-end domain, if you want to get into VLSI back-end domain? Majorly, someone who want to get into VLSI job, first decide between whether to get into pre-synthesis flow or post-synthesis flow. Pre-synthesis flow is what, as I said before, that is also called as front-end domain. Post-synthesis flow is called as back-end domain. Front-end domain starts from requirements, architecture, RTL coding, RTL integration, functional verification. Whereas back-end domain starts with synthesis, DFT. See, DFT sometimes happen here also. I mean, here also DFT can be there. But majorly I will place DFT into back-end domain. DFT, then you have physical design, then you have HTA, then we have physical layout, custom layout, then you have physical verification, then fabrication, chip is fabricated, then you have post silicon validation. So someone who want to get into VLSI design flow has to majorly decide between whether they want to get into pre-synthesis flow, whether they want to get into post-synthesis flow. Irrespective of that, you still need a common skill set. It doesn't matter whether you are getting into front-end domain or back-end domain, but there is a common skill set you require. That is, first thing is you need to have a strong digital design fundamentals. You should be very good with CMOS and FinFET basics. Okay, other than that, you should be good with Linux operating system. Why Linux operating system? Because most of the work that happens in the industry will be based on Linux operating system only. And you should be learning one scripting language, either Perl language, Python language, or TCL language. And you should be learning one GVim editor. For example, you see I'm typing here. What is the benefit of this GVim editor? If I copy these 5 lines, I just paste it. I can paste it. Let's say I want to delete these lines, I can delete it. So this kind of skill set is what I'm talking about when I said exposure to one text editor. So it doesn't matter whether you are getting into front-end domain or whether you are getting into back-end domain. This common skill set is required, where you need to be good with digital design fundamentals, CMOS and FinFET basics, Linux operating system, one of the scripting languages, and one text editor exposure. Now, let us say you want to get into front-end domain. Front-end domain is majorly programming oriented job role, programming based job role. I mean, you should like to get into front-end domain, you should like programming. It is like you do C programming and C+ programming. Here we do programming using, I won't call it as programming, coding, using Verilog, System Verilog, and UVM, which is similar to C program, C++, and Java. A simple analogy, in software we learn C, C++, Java. When you want to get into VLSI programming job, you need to learn Verilog, System Verilog, and UVM. That is the front-end domain. And if you have such interest towards the programming, then you should get into front-end domain. If you don't like programming, then you need to get into back-end domain. Back-end domain is more technology-oriented job role, where you need to understand the fundamentals of everything very well. I mean, how does CMOS work? How does fabrication work? All those fundamentals you should be very good with. Only then you should get into back-end domain. And it is also completely tool-intensive job. Means we need to use EDA tools. Lot of EDA tools are used at each stage of the flow. So now in this slide, let us understand what is the skill set is required if you want to get into front-end domain. So for the people who have just joined or who couldn't follow, we have divided the whole design flow, the whole VLSI design flow into two domains. This I am calling as front-end domain. This I am calling as back-end domain. Someone who is looking to get into VLSI job, even though you are in third year now, even though you are in second year now or fourth year now, but you need to plan to get into the job from now itself. Here you need to make a decision whether I have to get into front-end domain or whether I have to get into back-end domain. As I said before, front-end domain is more programming oriented job role. If you like programming, you did C, C++ programming sometime and you liked it, then front-end domain is the right domain for you. Otherwise, you can look for back-end domain. Okay. Now, if you want to get into front-end domain, what is the skill set required? Front-end domain requires you to read the specification, comprehend the design and architecture. I mean, I will be provided with documents which will talk about what is my design is about, how my mobile phone is going to work like, how many blocks are there, how they are connected to each other. That is what is called as architecture and design specification. And we need to learn some standard protocols. You see in my diagram, I told you some protocols like AXI, AHB, OCP, I2C, SPI, different protocols. A front-end engineer needs to learn those protocols very well. Then you need to have programming expertise. The programming languages are divided into two categories. One is called as hardware description languages. Other category is called as hardware verification languages. Description languages is for design purpose. Verification languages are for verification purpose. And you should be having good debug expertise. Let's say when you are running your program, you are running the code and you find some issue, some failure. You should be good at debugging those simulation failures, tracing the design using EDA tools, analyzing the failing test logs. So if you think you will be able to enjoy this kind of work, then front-end domain is the right domain for you. Otherwise, what is there in the back-end domain? Let's understand. Back-end domain requires a completely different skill set. You should be having tool expertise because complete VLSI backend flow is implemented using EDA tools. Like we use tools like ICC2, PrimeTime, Design Compiler, StarRC. There are many tools that we use. You should be learning the tools. I'll just give you one simple analogy. You go to this PPT, PowerPoint, Microsoft PowerPoint. You explore different options, right? How to use different options. Same thing is with the tools also. How do I use different options of the tool to implement my flow? If you like that kind of job role, yes, backend is the right domain for you. Other than that, you also should be very good with the device and semiconductor fundamentals. Quite in-depth understanding. I mean, what is mean by CMOS? What is CMOS second order effects? What is CMOS latch-up? How do we figure out, how do we fix this CMOS latch-up effects? That level of deep understanding is required. So what is, when I say device and semiconductor fundamentals, what is that you need to learn? you need to understand what is starting from what is conductor, what is insulator, what is semiconductor, what is N doping, what is P doping, what is a diode, what is a BJT, PMOS, NMOS, CMOS, FinFET, and what are the second order effects and circuits based on above devices. Let us say I give you CMOS inverter. VCC, let's say this is input, this is output. Okay, a backend engineer need to understand not just the CMOS inverter behavior, he needs to understand what will be the impact of doping on this PMOS, what will be the impact of doping on this NMOS, how much, what will happen if I increase the depth of the gate, what will happen if I increase the channel width. At that level, they need to understand the fundamentals. A front-end engineer doesn't require this level of expertise, because front-end engineer role is only to do the Verilog programming. His role is to do only Verilog programming and check whether that Verilog programming is working properly or not. Backend engineer need to work at the minute level of the circuits. Here I am not talking about spice analysis. I am talking about understanding the fundamentals of devices and semiconductors. So you need to learn diode, BJT, PMOS, NMOS, all those basic technical concepts. Second order effects, what is leakage happens, what is the substrate leakage, all those concepts need to be learned here. And they also need to learn the IC fabrication concepts. What are the different steps that happen in the IC fabrication? And other than that, the backend engineer also need to be good with resistance, inductance, capacitors. Let's say if I give you one resistor and capacitor, and there is a voltage, what is how the circuit, the charging will happen? Let's say here, what will be the impact of this? Let's say if I increase the capacitance, this will degrade further. If I increase the resistance, what will happen? That level of circuit analysis should also be there. Then they should understand parasitics, fan out, load, different types of delays, how the clock generation works, what is Q, what is buffer. And finally, there is one scripting language called as TCL, tool command language. That expertise is required. So majorly, there are two domains. One is front-end domain, one is back-end domain. Front-end domain, as I said before, it is more programming oriented job role. You don't need to understand any of these fundamentals. If you like programming kind of job role, then front-end domain is the right domain for you. In that case, you don't need to know much of these things. Whereas when you get into back-end domain, these fundamentals are essential. Without these, you can't get into any of the back-end jobs. Now, how do you choose the right domain? Let's say you are in third year now, and you feel that after your BTech or masters, you want to get into VLSI job. How do you choose? First, you have to choose between front-end domain or back-end domain. Don't start with the RTL. I'll get into RTL coding. I'll get into functional verification. I'll get into physical design. Just choose that. I will go with front-end domain as my target domain. I'll go with back-end domain as my target domain. Job opportunities will be there in all the domains. It is not like, see, it is like a flow, right? If you go back, this is a complete flow. If one chip is manufactured, you need to do RTL coding, you need to do integration, you need to do functional verification, you need to do synthesis. Everything has to happen. It won't happen that only this has got jobs and this doesn't have jobs. It won't happen. It is just that number of opportunities will keep varying. This may have little more opportunities, this may have lesser opportunities. That variation will be there, but there will be job opportunities in all the domains. Okay, now all the VLSI domains are related, hence job opportunities will be there in all the domains. Do not come with the mindset that I can't do programming. See, most of the times electronics people from EC and EEE come with the mindset that I can't do programming. When you limit yourself, right, your options gets limited. So never come with the mindset that I can't learn device fundamentals, I can't do programming. That will limit your opportunities by a large extent. So hence, do not come with this kind of mindset. So you should be open to doing any kind of thing in that domains. You see which is better for you. So whether front end domain is better or back end domain is better. Okay. Now let us move to the industry trends. So I have given a brief about what is VLSI design flow, what is VLSI front end domain, what is VLSI back end domain, what is the kind of skill set you require for a front end domain, and what is the skill set you require for back end domain. Now let us talk about the industry trends. I'll be quick here. It will hardly take another 5 minutes. So VLSI design flow is majorly driven by the customer requirements. Performance. I mean, who is customer? You, me, and we are the customers basically. Let's say when we go to buy a mobile phone, what is our requirement? We want a device with high performance, large number of features, which is power efficient, which is portable, and it should be at a lower price. Okay, these are the requirements for me. Going for in the following slides, we will see how do we get performance, how do we get power efficiency, how do we get portable devices, how do we reduce the price. So we want higher performance, power efficient, portable, and low costing devices. Currently, most of the requirements in the market, if you see in the VLSI domain, market requirements are driven by automotive industry, self-driven cars, are the cars which requires the basic MCU, right? And artificial intelligence and machine learning. Even though artificial intelligence and machine learning are more of software domain where they require programming, but to implement those domains, you need hardware. And for cloud computing, you again need hardware to store all the data, to process that everything, and mobile SoC. Majorly, the requirements in the current market are driven by these domains: automotive, artificial intelligence and machine learning, cloud computing, and mobile SoC. Then, now let us talk about VLSI design flow has these requirements: performance, power efficiency, portability, and price. What is meant by performance? Performance is nothing but how quickly you can do a job. How quickly a job can be completed. I mean, an application can be completed. Example, okay. I am opening one 10 megabyte Word document is there. Opening this document. In one laptop, it will take only 2 seconds. Other laptop will take 10 seconds. So what is the difference? This is what is essentially we are calling as the performance. So the one laptop which has got high-end components, these are low performance components. So essentially, what is that defines the performance? Performance is nothing but essentially frequency. At what frequency we can operate the device at. So and performance is majorly related to processors used in the systems. So to get better performance, one of the important thing is the processors. So ARM processors are one of the important thing that constitutes the current portable devices. You take any device, any portable device, mobile phone or any kind of devices which are portable, they are all having ARM processors. The latest thing that is happening in this ARM process is the Cortex A72. To get the best performance out of ARM process, you have to go for Cortex A72. So you may be wondering, what is this Cortex A72? So ARM processor, ARM company has tens of processors, like A series processors. I told you sometime before, M series, R series processors. Again, A series can have A15 processor, A52, A53, A72. M series can have M30, M33. This may have some R series. I don't remember the numbers, but let's say R20, just an example. Okay. So among all of them, A72 is the one which gives the best performance. It is based on the latest ARM version, ARM architecture version. And other thing that is happening in the industry is RISC-V. Some of you might have heard of RISC-V, but industry hasn't moved to RISC-V yet. Reason is most of the architectures. See, this architecture which I have drawn is based on ARM architecture. A company which is developing a chips based on this architecture, they will not move to RISC immediately, because they have to change this whole architecture to move from ARM to RISC architecture, RISC-V architecture. They need to change this whole architecture, which they are reluctant. But what is the benefit of moving to RISC-V architecture? There is no licensing, whereas in ARM process, they have to pay licensing fee to the ARM company. When you are using one specific processor from ARM, for every chip that you manufacture, you need to pay them some royalty. Whereas in RISC-V, you don't have to pay. But the problem with RISC-V is it is not completely proven, and you have to change your complete architecture. Hence, companies are not yet moving to RISC-V. And other than that, GPU, as you know, graphics processing unit is one of the very important component in all the SoCs. So NVIDIA has something called as GeForce architecture, which is the one of the things that is happening now. And other thing that industry is moving towards is multi-core processors. See, you take any high-end mobile SoCs these days, they have octa-core processors. What is meant by octa-core processor is one processor having 8 cores. 1, 2, 3, 4, like that. One is called as high-end processors, one is low-end processors. So 4 high-end processors, 4 low-end processors, that will be called as octa-core processors. Then to get better performance, we are moving to high performance protocols like PCI Express Generation 5, USB 3.1, DDR5, ACE protocol, AHB5 protocols. So these things together, ARM processors and octa-core processors and high-end protocols give us the required performance. What is meant by performance? I am able to do 20 gigabytes per second transfer. Let's say I am able to do 10 gigabytes per second. To achieve this kind of speeds, what is that I require? Okay, by using Cortex A72, by using PCI Express Generation 5, I will be able to come up with an architecture which will do this kind of speed transfers. Now you may ask, why do I need such speeds? I will give you an example. I am doing this webcam based teaching. If my laptop doesn't support this kind of speed, let's say my laptop doesn't support 1 gigabits per second speed, the quality of our call will not be good. It will be bad. So you won't enjoy that call. So like that, every electronic product has some requirements, performance requirements. To meet that performance requirements, you need some basic components which will give you that kind of bandwidth. Hence, we have to, the industry is specifically moving for these kind of requirements. Next, one is about performance. I was talking about performance, power consumption, and price. So for power consumption, what is the current industry trend is SoC is divided into multiple voltage, multiple power, and multiple clock domains. This diagram will be divided into multiple domains. One domain, second domain, third domain, fourth domain. Like that we divide. What they do with these domains is, if only this domain is required, this is only on, this is off, this is off, this is off. Let's say this is on. So only these two will be interacting. Rest of things will be off. That way, what you do is you reduce the power consumption. Other than that, other technique that is being used in the industry is supply voltage reduction. I mean, if you reduce the voltage, as you know, power consumption is proportional to the square of voltage. If you reduce the voltage, power consumption comes down by square of voltage level. How do we do that? DDR4, for example, double data rate SDR4 was working at works at 1.2 volts to 1.35 volts, whereas earlier generation of that was working at 1.5 volts. So they have reduced the voltage of operation from 1.5 volts to 1.2 volts. That way power consumption is reduced. Other than that, there is one more technique called as dynamic voltage frequency scaling. What is mean by this? Dynamic voltage scaling is a component can work between 1.5 volts to 1.2 volts, for example. If the performance is required, they will increase the voltage to 1.5. If performance is not required, they will reduce the voltage to 1.2 volts. Same thing with the frequency. A component can work from 500 megahertz to 1 gigahertz. Based on the requirement, they will run the component either at 500 megahertz or 1 gigahertz. So that is called as dynamic voltage frequency scaling. So these techniques help us reduce the power consumption. Other than that, so how do we reduce this thing? Price and portability, moving towards lower technology nodes. To reduce the price, let's say one chip takes 100 square mm square. If I can make this chip to be 25 square mm square, my cost will reduce by 1/4, right? So how do you do that? You reduce the technology. Like let's say you manufacture it at 10 nanometer. Instead of that, you manufacture it at 5 nanometer. Automatically the size will come down. The cost can be reduced, and it will become more portable. Portable means what? It will become smaller in size, and my chip will require smaller only in that case. My mobile phone can be smaller to accommodate a smaller chip. So how do you do that? By moving to lower technology nodes like 3 nanometer and 5 nanometer. The 3 nanometer technology is based on GAA FET, which stands for Gate All Around FET, and 5 nanometer fabrication is based on multi-gate MOSFET. And Qualcomm has announced a 5 nanometer Snapdragon chip. I mean, you may find some mobile phones which has got a chip which is based on 5 nanometer technology also. Now, so this is how we are able to we are able to get higher performance, reduced power consumption, and portable and less costing devices. So I still didn't have chance to get deep into this industry trends because the time limits, of course. So with this, I complete the overview of what is VLSI design flow and what are the factors that are driving the industry for next few years. Now, if you have any questions, I'll address those. Okay, first question: is it necessary to do? I will first answer Rohit Thakur question. Is it necessary to get into? Okay, to get into RTL design, answer is no. Mostly BTech students are placed in validation team only. See, getting into, okay, to answer this one, you getting into VLSI job is difficult. Getting into VLSI domain is difficult part. You can always switch to better domain, switch to different domain, in different team, rather I would say different job role in VLSI in 1 to 3 years time. It is possible. Next is okay. Rohit, does it answer your question? Of course, doing MTech from good colleges does help. I mean, I will tell you why MTech is very important here. MTech is important because most of the people who get into VLSI jobs are campus hired. I mean, MTech from IIT or NITs. chance of getting into product company will be there, and it comes with a better chance of getting into VLSI. Okay, now issue with training institutes is less chance of 1 minute, I'll answer the question. Less chance of getting VLSI job. It was very good. I am writing down all the answers because I will be sharing these notes with you. For some of you it may be useful, so I thought I'll write down the notes as well. The hiring was very good till 2017-18. After that, things are quite bad in VLSI. So in those cases, if you are from MTech from an IIT or NIT, those kind of high-end colleges, you will have better chance of getting into companies. Otherwise, with training institutes, currently given the market scenario, the chance of getting into VLSI job is not good. Okay. Now, next question. You said that architecture goes with low performance based on factors like cost. How is speed counted? Doesn't the speed and other factors, including functionality, affect in long run? Architecture goes with low performance based on factors like cost. No, I mean here basically how it works is there are three things: PPP. One P stands for performance, one P stands for power, one P stands for price. Okay, we can only get best two things best. One we have to compromise. I hope you understood. If you are going for a high performance, better power behavior, you need to that product will cost you high price. So the example is better performance, better power behavior, and costing more, which is that Intel processors. Another example is better performance, not a good power behavior, but costing less, which is that example AMD. So if you try to target one or two things best, you have to compromise on the other thing. So in that context, you need to decide, the architect will decide what is his priority, whether to reducing the price is important, or giving high performance is the priority. Accordingly, they decide. Aryan, does it answer your question? Yeah, someone had a question. Okay, so before I conclude, any other questions you have? Okay, thank you everyone. So I will conclude the session here. I only want to say one thing. It was planned to be 1 hour. Generally in 1 hour, it becomes little difficult to get the flow. I mean, as a trainer, as a speaker, I need to catch up the flow. So I may have found that little difficult in the beginning. I will be sharing these notes and this presentation with the organizer, so he will share it across to you in case you need it. Okay, thank you everyone for your time. We will end the session here.
Thank you so much, sir, for this informative webinar. We really appreciate your efforts, and thanks to the supportive audience.
Okay, sure. Thank you, Tanisha.